Bowl Bonanza in Super Bold, big brazen, capital letters, underlined with all sorts of crazy emojis everywhere that scream, "We love college football." Next. All right, everyone. Welcome into Mark Rogers TV's College Football Coast to Coast. This is edition number 4. We come your way every Wednesday night, 8 o'clock Eastern Time. You can catch us live on YouTube. The stream goes out live on YouTube, also on Facebook every Wednesday night, 8 o'clock Eastern Time. But if you miss it, no worries. You catch us on Mark Rogers TV on YouTube. Catch the videos as well as this show. 3,000 college football videos with some of the best bloggers across the country. And we are in the midst of bowl season, so we have all sorts of previews, predictions, and analysis coming your way each and every day on Mark Rogers TV on YouTube. Also, like me on Facebook at Mark Rogers TV and follow me, and we'll discuss some college football, of course. Discuss and possibly debate on Twitter. So our guests tonight include Joe Lisi from GoForThe2.com. Joe is an encyclopedia of college football. He's a maniac. As he told us a couple weeks ago, 900 plus videotapes of college football games throughout the 80s and 90s up until today. He lives it. He breathes it. He loves it. And also Mike McDaniel from Inside the ACC. Mike and I started a venture a few weeks ago called, get this, Mark Rogers TV ACC. So that's our ACC channel, Mark Rogers TV ACC. Also have a Mark Rogers TV Pac-12 channel that you can catch on YouTube. So we're gathering some of the best contributors you can find and building some networks on YouTube. So before we get to Joe and a little bit later, Mike, hey, it's bowl season. And with bowl season every year comes a little bowl bashing. It's kind of that season to actually bash the bowls. And the more bowls we have, the more bashing comes. And I completely get it. We have 41 bowl games. So do the math, NCAA, because they ran into this issue last season. So the criteria for earning your way to a bowl trip was at least have a 6-5 record back when there was an 11-game season. And then they added a 12th game, depending on the team in the conference, 10 or 12, 15 years ago, added a 12th game and just reach 500 and you can get to a bowl game. Be 6-6, reach a bowl game. Well, the brilliance of the NCAA in doing the math, in which they failed to do, 128 FBS teams, 41 bowl games, that's 82 spots. That's well over half the field of FBS football teams for the bowl slots. So, of course, you are not going to have all 500 plus teams playing in bowl games. So, starting last year, we had to have 5-win teams play in bowl games. So, it was last year, it was Minnesota, Nebraska, somebody out of the MAC, San Jose State got entry into bowl play. This year, it happened again. Mississippi State's a 5-7 team. Hawaii's at 6-7. So I understand the bashing. You don't even have to be a good team. You can be a mediocre team, a marginal team. I would even argue in some cases a pretty bad team. And you can still earn a trip to a bowl game. But I always argued for those people that said, hey, we got too many bowl games. You know what? Don't watch what you don't want to watch. If you don't like the bowl game, if you think it's ridiculous, don't watch. The other knock against the many bowl games is we see half empty, to be kind. Why don't we just say it? 90% of the stadium empty on many occasions. Well, people need to understand, okay, I work in the television industry for a major network. That's not where they make the money. Yes, we saw it last night at the Boca Raton Bowl with Memphis taking on Western Kentucky. Yes, there are not going to be droves of college football fans that are going to make their way to South Florida to see the likes of Memphis and Western Kentucky. Therefore, the stadium basically empty, and people relate that to popularity. That's not the barometer. You see it during the NCAA basketball tournament, and we all love March Madness. What are the arenas on that opening weekend? Half of them are half or three-quarters empty. That doesn't relate to the popularity. That gives absolutely no indication to the popularity because, like I say, I work at a TV network and I see the ratings all the time. You can take the ratings even for those bowl games, the bowl games that we've seen over the last week, the likes of the Gildan, New Mexico Bowl and the Las Vegas Bowl and the RNL Carriers New Orleans Bowl, and the TV ratings for those games outweigh almost every college basketball game that you're going to see the entire regular season. Maybe aside from a North Carolina Duke offhand, some other big matchup, 3 or 4, 5 games during the college basketball regular season. Other than that, these bowl games wipe them away. So it's all about sponsorships, ratings on television, and money. Forget how many people are in the seats. Forget how many bowl games and how many 5 and 7 teams now. There's a handful. Basically 6 and 6 teams make their way into these bowl games. People still love watching football around the holidays and still watch these bowl games. The thing that I think may jeopardize the legitimacy of these bowl games, even beyond all that, even beyond 90% empty stadiums, even beyond sub 500 teams participating in these games, is what we saw this week. When we see star players, the likes of Leonard Fournette from LSU, Christian McCaffrey from Stanford, saying, my NFL draft prospectus is extremely important. And you know what? I got nicked up a little bit this year. And if this was a big game, if we were playing a conference championship game, if we were playing our arch rival, I'm healthy enough to play, but I can't risk it in this bowl game. It's just an exhibition game. And you know what? It is an exhibition game. And I can't risk it because I need to be healthy for the NFL draft. I got to be healthy for the combines and for the pro days on campus and for the NFL scouts to grade me. And so now we've seen 2 of what are probably the 10 best players in the country, Leonard Fournette, LSU, Christian McCaffrey, say, hey, I can't risk it. We also saw the other day Shock Linwood, who's a very good running back for Baylor, but a bit delusional because he doesn't understand maybe that he needs a bowl game to showcase himself. Basically, he's rated as an undrafted free agent or at the very best going to be drafted at the very end of the draft. And this only shows scouts, hey, he's not just a marginal talent when projecting toward the pros, but he's also a guy that's not going to be there for his team, and he's opting to sit out. And this is a guy who's gotten in fights with coaches, been suspended in the past. So Shock Linwood, Baylor running back, a bit of a different case, not making the smartest of choices. But I hate to see the Christian McCaffreys and the Leonard Fournettes sit out. I understand it. I don't blame them because I totally get it. But they definitely are making a career decision, a business decision, which is totally understandable. All right, a little bit later in the show, we're waiting on Joe Lisi from GoForThe2.com, and also a little bit later, Mike McDaniel from Inside the ACC to talk up the ACC Bowls. Would like to let you know that we've got a number of friends on board sponsoring Mark Rogers TV and this show in particular, College Football Coast to Coast. I don't know if Marty's ready for that. Of course, he's ready with the graphic. I'd like to tell you about a new sports app. First, let's go to the GoDaddy display that we have right there. This is the preeminent brand when it comes to domain hosting and domains, period. You know, this is it. This is the first one that comes to mind for anyone. This is the one that started me. So if you would like to increase your brand, if you're starting a new website, if you'd like to go with some new features, if you'd like to buy some domains so that you can promote your brand even further and lock up some domain names, GoDaddy is the place to go. So Mark Rogers TV's College Football Coast to Coast is also brought to you by GoDaddy. Grab that catchy domain name, attract views to your site, lock it up for big discounted rates. We've got a number of promo codes available to you, 30% off new products. If you use the promo code CJCMR30, also 99 cents off your .com domain, CJCMR99, and $1 per month economy hosting with a free domain And the promo code for that, CJCMRLW. If you join me on Facebook at Mark Rogers TV, also on Twitter, I'll make those promo codes available there so you don't have to try to keep up with me here. Also, FireFan. This is a very interesting app because we all love to play general manager, head coach. We like to be the guy that pulls the trigger. And especially as a Cleveland Browns fan who thinks that I could be running the draft better than the Cleveland Browns have, certainly over the last 5 or 10 years, give me control of the thing. Well, this is a new sports app that puts you on the sideline, puts you up in the owner's box. You call the plays, you make the decisions that matter. It's called FireFan. Download the app, play along with your game of choice. So it's the NFL, it's the college football, it's NBA, it's everything across the board. You predict the plays, you look at the situation. It's fun. You strategize with the coaches, you win big. Go to FireFan, you download the app, you use promo code You Can Play. You see it all in caps there. The letter U, You Can Play. You get your 12 free tokens there. Also, we have available to you, and just in time for the college football playoffs on December 31st, where we have Breaking T. You got your T-shirts right there. They're novelty T-shirts. They're specialty T-shirts, nothing that you're going to find in the store. So if you're an Ohio State fan, Alabama, Washington, Clemson, any of the Big Four playoff teams, plus we've got a Western Michigan edition as well available. You can find them there. You use the links that we have available for you. And again, you can follow me on Twitter, and you can also find me on Facebook at Mark Rogers TV and see where you can get your specialty T-shirts from Breaking T, our friends at Breaking T, and they always have a very unique and interesting take on what just happened in the world of sports, and for us, specifically college football, and they make up a really fancy unique T-shirt for you, and it can be ready the next day. For example, Ohio State, Michigan, of course, the big controversial play was, where did the officials spot the ball on 4th down? Well, for Buckeyes fans, Breaking T makes out a T-shirt. It says, actually the spot was right, and it was hot off the presses the next day and ready for you. So we've got the links ready for you, and again, you can get discounted T-shirts from Breaking T. I believe we've got Mr. Joe Lisi on the line from GoForThe2.com. Joe,
how are you, Mark?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Getting ready for another great weekend of college football. Can't wait. Starts tonight with Wyoming and BYU. Carries us through to December 31st. Can't wait.
So this is the one time during the season that I get a chance to see, like last night, the likes of Memphis and Western Kentucky, because that's not really my viewing on Saturday afternoon. I lock in on the Power Five. So how have you enjoyed the games thus far? Because we've gotten to see a lot of teams that we don't normally get to check out.
Yeah, I think it's an intriguing bowl season already, with a lot of intriguing battles, a contrast in styles. You saw last night Western Kentucky wear down Memphis. Memphis entering that battle only had 17 sacks on the year. They wound up picking 6 sacks on Mike White in that ball game, but it was the offensive consistency of Mike White and Anthony Wales that really wore down Memphis and forced Riley Ferguson to match them score for score. They couldn't do it. Talking about a Western Kentucky team that was averaging 45 points per game. Just a great, great battle. I just really like seeing these bowl matchups play out, see which team could dictate tempo. Even though we've seen some blowouts already, we saw Tulsa knock off Central Michigan in dominating fashion. Still happy with the bowl season because we get to see teams and see which teams can dictate tempo early on in this bowl season.
Okay, Joe, for me, it's not really bowl season until the Power Five. The big boys start playing after Christmas, and that's when I'm already locked in, but I really dissect these because then I can start to compare the conferences, and I can see, hey, the 5th place team from the ACC is playing 5th place team from the Big 12. How do they shake out? So these are the 5 games I really want you to lock in on, and I'm going to line you up with. So we've got a Mississippi State team, the aforementioned 5-7 team that makes a bowl game. Mississippi State 5-7 taking on Miami of Ohio, a 6-6 club, St. Petersburg Bowl, and again, that's the day after Christmas, Joe.
It's an intriguing battle. Up to this point, the MAC hasn't stepped up in the bowl season. You saw Central Michigan get blown out. But I like Miami of Ohio in this matchup. Keep in mind, last year, 3, 5, and 7 teams made it to bowls last year. San Jose State, Nebraska, and Minnesota. They all won their bowl games. So keep that in mind as we watch this game play out. This is a hot Mississippi State team. They knocked off Texas A&M, knocked them out of the top 4 in terms of the college football playoff. They have a big play quarterback in Nick Fitzgerald. But keep an eye out for this game because I really think it comes down to Miami O's rush defense. They're only giving up about 138 rushing yards per game. Very solid in terms of the back end as well. And this is a quarterback in Gus Ragland by Miami O that has thrown on the season 15 touchdowns, no interceptions. You look at Mississippi State's rush defense entering this battle. They've given up 178 rushing yards on the ground. I know on paper it looks like Miss State might dominate this ballgame, but I do think that Miami O will be in this game from start to finish, and I think they get the upset special over the Bulldogs in this battle.
Hey, Joe, a lot of people are underselling this next game. The Holiday Bowl is usually a fun one, but it doesn't look like one this year. And get this stat. I know that you already know it very well, but it could be an open and shut case for a lot of college football fans when they see that Washington State and Luke Falk have thrown 39 touchdown passes this season. Mitch Leidner in Minnesota, 8. That looks like a mismatch. But, of course, football's more than just chucking it down the field. I believe in this Minnesota team. I think this is a good matchup. Washington State out of the Pac-12, Minnesota out of the Big Ten. Minnesota getting to a 5th consecutive bowl game. And considering the 4 teams that Minnesota lost to, I know that they're a substantial underdog in this game, but Nebraska, Wisconsin, Iowa, not coming up with the other team that they lost to.
Penn State.
Exactly. All one-score games. Penn State, an overtime game, and Happy Valley, all one-score games for Minnesota. This should be a really good game. I want to see this one start to finish.
Yeah, this is an intriguing battle because you bring up great points. It sort of reminds me of last year's game with USC and Wisconsin. You have a methodical offense in Minnesota that resembled Wisconsin last year with a high-octane offense in Washington State and Luke Falk that really played lights out from the second week of the season through the Apple Cup against Washington. Did drop that ball game against Colorado and followed that up with a loss to Washington in the Apple Cup. But they're a high-octane offense, and they're averaging 126 rushing yards on the ground. That's the difference between last year and this year. Last year, they were in the area of about 80 rushing yards per game. The ability to run the football for Washington State allows Mike Leach to save his defense and hold the lead in fourth quarter games. But I think when you look at this battle overall, I really feel that this game comes down to Minnesota's defense, their ability to shut down the run consistently. They're only giving up 124 rushing yards per game. They're +8 in turnover margin, and they pound the football between the tackles with Rodney Smith and a physical offensive line that's averaging 187 rushing yards per game. You brought up the 8 touchdowns by Mitch Leidner with 12 interceptions. I put a lot of weight into that, but I also put in a lot of weight that he's had now 4 weeks to prepare. He's a senior. This is a quarterback in Mitch Leidner that was projected as possibly a first-round draft pick. You saw it a couple of years ago when Oklahoma played Clemson with Cliff Stout. He was a senior as well. He did not play well in the regular season and really stepped up in the bowl game against Oklahoma. I think this is the same type of scenario. I think Minnesota strikes the upset. I think they'll be in this game from start to finish. A lot of people are worried about the boycott. I think that'll bring this team together. I think the Golden Gophers get the upset in the Holiday Bowl. I think it's high scoring, too. Look for a shootout. These games always seem to be wild. We're due for a crazy Holiday Bowl. Minnesota strikes the upset.
And, Joe, you touch on something that's different about Washington State, and you alluded to it. I'm just going to expand upon it. So Mike Leach takes over there, a program that's winning 2 or 3 games. Of course, he installs the air raid offense. They get some quarterbacks in play that can throw, most notably and most recently, Luke Falk. Yeah, that's what gains the headlines and the attention of everyone. But Washington State just a couple years ago was running for like 2.5 yards a carry. There was no support from the ground game of the pass game. Jamal Morrow, James Williams, these guys are running for 6.5 yards per carry. They have developed a running attack. Sure, they're still going to throw it 45 to 50, but they're not throwing it 70 times now. And you would win a lot of bets in having people try to guess the third best rush defense in the Pac-12 is at Washington State.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, you're absolutely right. That's why Washington State did reel off 8 straight wins in the Pac-12 since week number 2 because of their physicality on the defensive line. This is a defense that's only given up about 138 rushing yards per game, and they're positive in turnover margin. The one thing that you look at Washington State overall, they need success in the passing attack to run the football. When they really need to run the football diligently between the tackles in 2 of their toughest games against Colorado and against Washington State, against Washington, especially in the red zone, they struggled. So that's why I like Minnesota. They're a physical defensive front seven, play very good red zone defense, and that's why I think they match up very well against Wazoo in this battle. Again, I think a lot of points will be scored. I just think it'll be different types of ways that they'll score these points. I look for Washington State to attack Minnesota's secondary. That's the way you have to beat Minnesota's defense over the top. They're giving up around 218 passing yards per game. And the way you have to beat down Washington State, you can wear them down if you have a big physical offensive line, the way Washington did and wore them down in the Apple Cup. I think Minnesota could do the same. Look for Rodney Smith to have a big day, calling for the upset with the Golden Gophers.
So the night camp on Tuesday night, December 27th at the Cactus Bowl, you've got Boise State out of the Mountain West. Didn't win the conference. Many would still consider that to be the best team. We did see San Diego State look really good against Houston, but Boise comes in at 10-2. Baylor wins 6, loses 6 straight to close out the season with Jim Grobe on the sidelines. Obviously, with Matt Rule coming in for 2017, Baylor, keep your eyes out for the Bears because Matt Rule, one of the better up-and-comers in college football. But for this game, Boise State looks like they could be a solid choice.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. In this ball game, I think it'll be a tough battle, but I still like Baylor because of their ability to run the football. Shock Linwood's out for this ball game. He declared for the NFL draft, but I still like the speed of Baylor and the way they force teams to methodically work down the field in terms of passing offense. They force West Virginia, a very high-octane offense, at the end of the year to work down the fields. Boise State is the same type of offense, and they struggled against physical defensive fronts like Air Force. I mean, you watch that game, Boise State and Air Force, they struggled to run the football with McNichols between the tackles. So, again, I think that Baylor could be in this game from start to finish. I think this game means a lot to Boise State, but I still think it means a lot to Baylor. They started the year winning 6 straight. They lost 6 straight to end the year, but played well down the stretch. The extra time off, I think, will benefit quarterback Zach Smith. He is a freshman, so the extra preparation, I think, will get him acclimated to quarterback-wide receiver relationship. I like Baylor to be in this game from start to finish, and I think they get the upset as well. I think they have a speed advantage over Boise State, calling for the upset with the Baylor Bears in the Cactus Bowl.
So, Joe, it's a situation at Baylor where they basically bring back the same backfield that just completely dismantled North Carolina in the bowl game last year and set rushing records in the Russell Athletic. The offensive line is different, but Baylor with those same backs, Terrence Williams and company, that they had last year and just dismantling North Carolina. So, yeah, you do have a discrepancy in Big 12 play versus Mountain West, and that's always an intriguing situation in bowl play to see the upper echelons from the Mountain West and the Group of 5 take on maybe a mid-tier team from a Big 12 and see how it shakes out as well. All right, the Foster Farms Bowl, Joe. It brings us Utah, 19th in the country at 8-4, a team that I don't want to say that they didn't play well down the stretch. I caught the Colorado game. They were within a possession. They had a turnover that turned into a fumble recovery for the touchdown for the Buffs that really turned that game around. They had a chance to win, taking on Indiana. Unfortunate situation here because this program over the last 2 years has looked like it's finally ready to turn the corner in the Big Ten. They are taking the likes of Ohio State and Michigan, and this year defeating Michigan State, taking Penn State to a one-score game until it was late in the game and actually had a lead in the second half. But unfortunately, Kevin Wilson, mistreatment of players, so a non-football related situation. He's gone, and it's Utah taking on Indiana with the defensive coordinator stepping up as the new head coach.
Yeah, this is an intriguing battle because I like Indiana here. I think they have the ability to really move the football on Utah. It's another contrast in styles. Indiana has shown the propensity to run a low-scoring game like they did on the road in Ann Arbor against Michigan and almost playing Michigan toe-to-toe in that battle. They lost that matchup but played a very good game plan against the Wolverines. And then they could play a high up-tempo attack like they did against Penn State. So I think they're built both ways. I think the way you have to beat Utah is over the top. You have to challenge their secondary. And over the last 3 years now, Utah struggled with speed teams on their schedule. So Indiana does have those type of playmakers with wide receiver Ricky Jones, Devine Redding at the running back position. They have a big play quarterback in Lego. I think they can challenge this secondary. Again, it's going to be which team can dictate tempo. When you look at Indiana, the one knock on them overall is turnover margin. They're -7 in turnover margin entering this ball game. That's an issue in these bowl games. You want teams that could create turnovers and run the football effectively. They're very good against the run, though, especially in the Big Ten, only giving up around 152 rushing yards per game. I think they could shut down Joe Williams and make Troy Williams beat them over the top. I think this is a close game. I think Utah wins, but I think it's very, very close, a lot closer than the experts think. I like Indiana to be in this game from start to finish, but I'm calling for Utah to win this game by about 3 points.
Yeah, Utah certainly doesn't scare anyone on the outside. Patrick's a nice receiver. I saw them again in the Colorado game, and the lack of a passing attack, the lack of a dynamic playmaker on the outside usually limits Utah, but they are extremely strong in the front seven. Typically, it's going to be interesting to see if the Hoosiers have enough muscle in the front seven. This is a very different Indiana program than it was just a couple years ago. They don't get pushed around. They don't miss tackles. They don't blow coverages. It's a sound defense, much more so than really anything we've seen out of Indiana since the early 1990s, and that's the last time they went back-to-back bowl games in 1990 and in 91. So finally, Joe, we'll keep you around to talk Texas Bowl, and we got an SEC Big 12 matchup. And since they formed this alliance between the SEC and the Big 12 and the Texas Bowl, the likes of Arkansas having its way 2 years ago against Texas. And this year it's the Aggies and the Wildcats. Kansas State, I got to say, I'm a bit surprised by the 8-4 finish. Texas A&M kind of coming at it from a different perspective. They got off to the hot start. They were top 5 in the nation. They played well against Alabama for a half, and injuries to Trevor Knight and just falling off the radar late. So different motivations maybe in this one. Texas Bowl, Texas A&M, Kansas State.
Yeah, this is one of my better picks of all bowl season. At the start of the year, I was very high on Texas A&M. I thought they would challenge Alabama, especially in that ball game in Tuscaloosa. They had the 14-13 lead, couldn't hold on, lost that matchup 33-14. But I was very down on K-State overall. When you look at their offense, a very methodical, blue-collar type of team that really struggles in terms of speed on the perimeter. I think their whole offense revolves solely around quarterback Jesse Ertz. You shut him down, you could shut down that offense. And I think this is a really bad matchup for Kansas State. I think the way you have to beat Kansas State, you have to strike first. You have to put the pressure on their offense to match them score for score. If you're going to get into a 3-and-out type of game and give the football back to Kansas State and allow them to drive the length of the field and kick a field goal, and all of a sudden now 9 minutes are off the clock, K-State will be in this game from start to finish. I think Texas A&M has the playmakers. Now, Speedy Noel is suspended for this game. It doesn't matter, in my opinion. Christian Kirk, Josh Reynolds, Ricky Seals-Jones, Travion Williams, Keith Ford, and a healthy Trevor Knight will put pressure on Kansas State secondary. I think the difference of Texas A&M with Jake Hubenak to Trevor Knight is there is no threat of Trevor Knight in the read option with Jay Kubinak at the helm. He's a prototypical quarterback that you know where he's going to be. If Trevor Knight's healthy in this matchup, Kansas State really has to defend the read option, and they have to defend the wide receivers on the outside, especially on seam routes. This is a Kansas State defense that's given up 259 passing yards per game. If you've watched them throughout the year, especially in that game against Oklahoma, when you have playmakers on the outside, you can exploit them vertically. And I think Texas A&M wins this game by 20 or more. I really feel this is a bad matchup for Kansas State. One of my better picks all bowl season. I think Texas A&M wins this ball game 40-20. That's how strongly I feel about this matchup.
Okay, doesn't surprise me. We saw Kansas State line up against Arkansas in the Liberty Bowl last year, and we saw them compete. They were in a one-score game most of the way. Just the physical pounding of the Arkansas running game, the superior athletes in the fourth quarter in the last 10 to 12 minutes, and suddenly it was like a 45-23 game, and they win by 3+ touchdowns. And this could be very similar. Like you say, it's one of those matchups that just you have the feel of the athletes versus some limitations on the athletic side for the other team, and you know that the one team, Kansas State, in this situation has to play a near perfect game to combat the athleticism and the athletic gap. This is a Texas A&M team that I thought had the best wide receiver core in college football entering the season. I'd give that to Clemson right now because they go 5 or 6 deep with exceptional players. But still, yeah, A&M, even without Speedy Noyle, with plenty of playmakers. Myles Garrett, despite the issues we see with the likes of Leonard Fournette and Christian McCaffrey not playing, here's the kid that's probably going to be the number 1 selection in the NFL draft who's saying, hey, I'm playing with my guys, and I'm going to go out in style and get a W for my alma mater. So that's good to see.
Yeah, that's a great point that you bring up about Myles Garrett. I think when you look at a defensive game plan against Kansas State, it is the defensive end play of Myles Garrett and Deshaun Hall, their speed off the edge that'll contain Jesse Ertz. I don't think they've seen 2 defensive ends that are coming off the edge like Deshaun Hall and Myles Garrett all season long, especially in the read option. So that's why I like Texas A&M as well. And if you give John Chavis 4 weeks of preparation time, he'll come up with a defensive game plan to really neutralize Kansas State's offense. And look out for safety Armani Watts. His ability in run support, he might spy Jesse Ertz in this ball game, shut down the read option, force Jesse Ertz to throw over the top. Bad matchup for Kansas State, in my opinion.
So what I'm hearing, Joe, is in the St. Petersburg Bowl, you love Mississippi State over Miami.
I like Miami of Ohio to be in that.
Miami.
Yeah, I like Gus Ragland and Miami O to strike the upset. It's all dogs, Mark. I think all dogs. I think Boise State loses to Baylor. I think Texas A&M is my only favorite that I'm picking in the 5 bowls that we discussed.
Okay,
but I
Minnesota
think Indiana
wins.
loses a tough game.
Okay, very good. Good stuff from Joe Lisi from GoForThe2.com. Joe, before we let you go, I'd love to get you to chime in on the Leonard Fournette, Christian McCaffrey situation. I think Shock Linwood's kind of a really odd case because he's not going to be a factor in the NFL draft. I have no idea what he's thinking, but we talked about Myles Garrett just a minute ago. Here's a premium player who's going to play. I understand the decision that these guys are making. They're making a business decision, and they're looking out for themselves. I totally get it. But I would at least like to know, in the case of Leonard Fournette, that he's been nicked up, that the ankle hasn't been right the entire season. So at least there's a legitimate reason in his case.
Oh, I agree with you. I mean, just because we understand it doesn't mean we have to like it. I mean, if you watch Leonard Fournette in game number 4 against Auburn, he did have a high ankle sprain and was banged up in that ball game, came back against Ole Miss and really played as his heart out for much of the way, but still wasn't 100%. I understand it. I just don't like it. I mean, again, I understand what they're doing. They have a business interview with the NFL draft. But as football players, we're taught to compete each and every week. We're taught to be there for our teammates. So what are we really saying in the end game for the game of football? That's the one thing that just because I understand it doesn't mean I don't agree with it. So it is what it is. And unfortunately, money drives the bus. So it'll be that way going forward, unfortunately, for the rest of the year and in 2017 and 18.
All right, Joe, I got your picks down right here. I got check marks next to the winning teams. I'm going to scratch my head on Boise State and Baylor and try to figure that one out. Otherwise, I think I'm playing along with you, and I'll have my picks released out here pretty soon. Joe, where can we catch you?
You can catch me at Go for the Two. That's the number2.com, at Go for the Two on Twitter. And you can find me on a number of different media outlets from now until the January 1st.
All right, Joe. Thanks for jumping on College Football Coast to Coast.
Love the show, Mark. Anytime.
All right. You take care. Merry Christmas.
You too.
All right. That's Joe Lisi, the one and only Joe Lisi, joining us from GoForTheTwo.com. And Joe setting us up with a number of bowl games starting the day after Christmas with Mississippi State and Miami. Joe loves a couple upsets with Minnesota over Washington State. I'm going to have to think that one over. Indiana giving Utah a game, take the points there, according to Joe, and he loves Texas A&M all over Kansas State. I mentioned earlier in the show a venture that I have with Mike McDaniel from inside the ACC. If you love the ACC, and I'm not just talking about football, but sports across the board, basketball, of course, and baseball, check out Inside the ACC. My contribution, of course, nothing but college football, but Mike and I, a few weeks ago, launched a YouTube channel, Mark Rogers TV ACC. So we're going to Mike McDaniel now from Inside the ACC. Mike, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing well. How are you, Mark?
I'm doing just fine. So this is edition number 4 here. So I'm glad that I finally got you to come on board.
Yeah, no, we've talked about this for a while and how this was a new show for you, and I was eager to jump on. So I'm glad the timing worked out.
Definitely. So, Mike, I got to lean on you again for ACC play here. So the conference has yet to step into the fray, but it's coming soon right after Christmas. So we've got a number of bowl games to look at. And we will, believe me, between Mike and I, we will get to the heavy hitters, Clemson, Florida State, and the like a little bit later as those bowls near. But before we dive into some of these matchups, I have to get a quick take from you on Clemson and Ohio State, because there's kind of consensus on Alabama, Washington, and that might be a little bit ugly. But, man, this Clemson-Ohio State game could be very intriguing.
Yeah, it's tough to get a gauge on this game. It's really interesting because you look at Clemson, and they're a team that really has underperformed all year. They're kind of like last year's version of Ohio State in that regard. Ohio State obviously coming off the national championship 2 years ago. Everybody was expecting them to come in last year and play extremely well throughout the year. And they were playing well, but they were not playing up to their capability. I mean, I think the same could be said about this year's Clemson squad. I think that's why this matchup is especially interesting to me, is because it's almost like last year's Ohio State team in Clemson playing against an Ohio State team that now comes out this year and looks extremely motivated to try to win a national championship. I think if you get a Clemson team that's playing up to their capability, like we've seen against Florida State where they played well, like we saw against Louisville when they played well, this Clemson team is loaded. They have more weapons on offense than they did last year. Their defense is almost every bit as good as they were last year when they were runner-ups in the national championship game. This is a really, really good Clemson team when they're playing up to their capability. It'll just be interesting to see if they show up here in the college football playoff and play like we've seen them play in the past. And look, Deshaun Watson, he's gotten a lot of heat this year because he hasn't played quite as well as he did last year, but he's a guy who's definitely been a victim of his own success. So it'll be interesting to see how all that plays out. Personally, I think Clemson's going to play well in this game and have a great shot to win the game, but Ohio State's just such a complete team right now. It's really hard to gauge it either way at this point.
All right, Mike, let's get to the games that kick off here in just the next few days. Steve Addazio took over a lower rung program in the ACC of Boston College immediately. That got them to a couple bowl games. Then they bottomed out with a winless ACC. And it's just a program that's not going to win every year. He's got to catch it in cycles. He's got to recruit. He's got to persevere through some down times, and that's what happened last year. So good for Boston College to rally, get to the 6-win mark, and then face a Maryland team that's very similar. Can't compete anywhere close to the likes of the teams that they have to face in their division, so they have to win the games that they have to win, and they were able to do that out of conference, 2-6 in the Big Ten, but they swept the likes of a lot of lesser teams out of conference. So we got Maryland at 6-6 taking on BC. 6-6, maybe not with quite the dominant defense that they've had in recent years, but still very, very stout on that side of the ball.
Yeah, it's really hard to get a gauge on this game, really, because you look at Boston College, and like you said, their defense might not be as good as it's been in years past, but still a really solid unit. Offensively, look, Steve Addazio, it's really interesting. People forget he was the offensive coordinator at the University of Florida with Tim Tebow, and they were winning all the national championships and looking like one of the best teams in college football on the offensive side of the ball. And now he takes the reins at Boston College a few years back, and they've been nothing but bad offenses there since then. It's been really interesting to watch that develop. They obviously hired Scott Leffler from Virginia Tech. We can't necessarily say that that's worked out. Offensively, Boston College hasn't been much better this year. They got a quarterback that can at least throw the football, which is, for Boston College, watching them the last few years, it's an upgrade, believe it or not. Patrick Towles, 1,500 yards passing, 10 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, kind of a mixed bag there as far as the touchdown to interception ratio is concerned. But when Boston College takes care of the football and plays a ball control type of offense, they have a good enough stable of running backs led by John Hilliman to at least advance the ball a little bit. And if they keep the ball away from you long enough, the defense creates a turnover or two on a short field, Boston College can score enough points to beat you. And that's what they did to get to 6-6. When you look at Maryland, to your point, I mean, they're a team that obviously in the Big Ten is extremely overmatched at this point, but DJ Durkin's done a great job there in year one there at Maryland to really turn the program around. They really hit a downtime right after Ralph Friedgen was fired there years back. And then, they brought Randy Edsall in, and they had really struggled since then. But bringing in a guy like Durkin to lead the charge there for Maryland, they've been able to bounce back nicely, make a bowl game this year. Obviously, they won the games that they were supposed to win, like you said, and the same could be said for Boston College. It's the reason why both of these teams are bowl eligible. As far as a pick for this game, look, I love Boston College's defense, but I think Maryland's offense is going to score enough points to win this football game. I'm not sure the same can be said about Boston College's offense against Maryland. I think these two teams are extremely similar on both sides of the football. I think they play good enough defense and lackluster offense. But I think at the end of the day, Maryland's going to be able to score enough points. They got enough in the stable of running backs there led by their kid Johnson, 845 yards, 4 touchdowns on the year is their leading rusher. DJ Moore is a guy that they really like to throw to a ton, 597 yards and 6 touchdowns on the outside. I like Maryland. I think they have too many weapons for Boston College, and that can't be said for a lot of teams that Maryland plays against, but I think it'll be the case here in the Quick Lane Bowl, and because of that, I like Maryland to win, really a game that should be a toss-up.
Yeah, Mike, you're not kidding when you talk about 51% passing at Boston College being a definite upgrade. That's how bad it was before Patrick Towles. He's throwing for 51%, but that's an upgrade. Same situation at Maryland when you look at Perry Hills. He was a 50% passer who threw 5 more interceptions than touchdowns last year. This year, 10 TDs, 3 picks, 66%. So not jaw-dropping, but much better for a 3-9 team in 2015 at Maryland that's now a 6-6 team that beat Michigan State. Don't know how that happened, but we know Michigan State was way down this year and lost by a score to Indiana, respectable team, and again, improved from 3 wins to 6 this year. And of course, this is an old ACC matchup. These schools have met 11 times with BC, leading the series 8-3. All right. We also, Mike, of course, have NC State taking on Vanderbilt, and NC State, a team that got off to a good start, stumbled mid-season. And these are both schools that needed wins, upset wins late just to get to postseason play. So for NC State, it was an upset against North Carolina, a game in which they really dominated the first half, surprisingly, as a big underdog. And for Vandy, they beat Ole Miss and Tennessee down the stretch to get to 6-6. So at the Independence Bowl, interesting matchup with a couple 6-6 teams.
Yeah, and you want to talk about teams that won the games that they were supposed to. I mean, that's kind of what we say when we talk about NC State, with the exception of the Boston College game, which for whatever reason, NC State really didn't show up for offensively. They really struggled. Ryan Finley, especially at the quarterback position, he was pretty good most of the year, but he really struggled in that Boston College game, what ended up being a 21-14 loss to the Eagles. You look at Ryan Finley on the year, nearly 3,000 yards passing, 15 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. When he's taking care of the ball, passing wise, North Carolina State's been really good because their defense has been so stout this year. They run the ball extremely well. Matt Days, over 1,100 yards rushing here in his senior campaign, 10 touchdowns. He'll try to cap it off here in the bowl game against Vanderbilt and go out on the right note to end his collegiate career. A guy that we could definitely see playing on Sundays here in the near future. I really like NC State in this game because looking at Vanderbilt, I mean, they struggled through a tough SEC schedule, obviously. Beat Tennessee at the end of the year. They beat Mississippi. There are a lot of good wins on Vanderbilt's schedule, but there are also some questionable losses. The one that sticks out to me is the one in early November when they lost to Missouri, a game that Vanderbilt definitely should have won. They lost that game 26-17, a game that wasn't nearly as close as what the final score indicates. Their quarterback, Kyle Shermer, the issue with him has been throwing interceptions. He's 9 touchdowns, only 7 picks on the year, 2,200 yards passing. You got to take care of the football, and Vanderbilt's similar in style to North Carolina State in that they want to run first, but when they throw the ball through the air, it's really a crapshoot whether or not they're going to succeed in that regard, just because the turnovers have been a problem. Webb at running back there for Vanderbilt, over 1,100 yards and 12 touchdowns. He's very similar to Matt Days, very similar type of runner, can get north and south in a hurry, but can also make people miss. Because of that, I think this will be, a battle going back and forth throughout most of the game. I think it'll be relatively high scoring, even though both teams have competent defenses. I think the offenses are good enough in this one. I'm going to take NC State here over Vanderbilt just because I think the caliber of team that NC State has played here, you look at Vanderbilt in the SEC, most of their schedule in the SEC East. I mean, they had a lot of weaker teams that they played against this year. I like NC State because of the schedule they've played. They succeeded. They're obviously coming in with some momentum, even though it was a while ago. They did beat North Carolina to end their season. I think that's a big win to springboard the Wolfpack into this bowl game. Because look, NC State, they weren't even supposed to be in the bowl game. They win that game, of course, to get to bowl eligibility, and I think they'll succeed here in the Camping World Independence Bowl and beating Vanderbilt.
Talk about bad passing attacks. Vandy's been awful in throwing the football downfield for quite a long time, but they somehow caught something in a bottle over the last few games. Kyle Shermer hit up Ole Miss for 221 and a couple of scores, and then against Tennessee in the finale, again, to get them bowl eligible against what many would consider a much superior team athletically. 416 yards and 2 touchdowns. If you like defensive play, Zach Cunningham on the Vandy side is so good. He got consideration for SEC Player of the Year as a defensive player at Vandy. He's that good. 119 tackles, 16 and a half tackles for loss. Vandy also won a game against Georgia. And Georgia's not great this year. It's a down Georgia team, but it's still a pretty substantial 7-5 team, a pretty talented team. And they took Auburn to the hilt on the road. Vandy had an impressive season. There's no doubt about it. And one other interesting note here is going to be when NC State gets into the red zone. They are one of the worst. Vandy, one of the best in the country in red zone defense. Let's see. Offense is inside the 20, coming up empty a whopping 12 times, including it at least once in the last 9 games of the season. So they turned back and stiffened inside the 20. All right, Military Bowl. We got Wake Forest. Much like Boston College, didn't expect to see them in postseason. They won some games early that they weren't necessarily supposed to. A game against Duke, who's been a postseason team in recent years. Wake Forest squeezes in at 6-6, taking on a Temple team that won the conference. They're 24th in the country. They're sitting at 10-3. Sure, they lose their coach to Baylor, Matt Rule, but this Temple team accomplished quite a bit in the American. And again, it's a group of 5 top-tier team taking on a bottom-tier team from a Power 5.
This is a really interesting matchup here in the Military Bowl because you look at Wake Forest, they love to stop the run, and they love to run the football, and that's kind of what they hung their hat on. Temple's almost exactly the opposite. They've been pretty decent against the pass this year, and they love to throw the football. So it's completely contrasting styles in this football game. Temple's quarterback, Philip Walker, has been very good this year. He threw for 2,900 yards and 20 touchdown passes. Raquel Armstead for Temple has been running the ball extremely well, nearly 1,000 yards rushing, had 14 touchdowns on the year. This is a Temple offense. It's very good, can put up some points in a hurry, so Wake Forest is going to have to be prepared for that. Also, I think an underlying factor in this game are obviously distractions, right? Because you have Wake Forest coming off of this whole WikiLeaks scandal. Then you have the Temple Owls, of course, losing Matt Rule, who's now going to take over as the head coach at Baylor. So you got a coaching change on one side. You got all the distractions and the sanctions being handed down, not really sanctions, more like fines for Wake Forest on the other side. And you've got a really interesting matchup here in the bowl game that nobody really knows, which team's going to come out more motivated. So that's another underlying factor that we'll have to watch that nobody will really know will happen here until the game takes place. On Wake Forest side, look, I mean, they love to run the ball. Like I said, Matt Colburn, Cade Carney have been the two guys that have really hung their hat on for most of the year. Matt Colburn is their leading rusher, 566 yards on the ground, but he's only scored once. John Wolford, he wasn't even really supposed to be the starting quarterback. He entered the season splitting time there at the position, ended up winning the starting quarterback job later in the year, and 1,500 yards passing, 7 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. Obviously not a great thrower of the football. They really want to run the ball there. And they wanted to run the ball anyway with quarterback Kendall Hinton before he hurt his ankle and went out for the rest of the season. And then they started throwing the ball around a little bit, and that's when Wake Forest got into trouble down the stretch. Obviously a pretty brutal schedule to close the season as well. 2 out of the last 3 weeks they had to face Louisville on the road and then played home against Clemson. Believe it or not, though, if you didn't catch the Louisville game, even though it was 44-12, Wake Forest was actually leading 12-9 entering the fourth quarter, and then just completely folded it really just folded up like a beach chair at that point. Louisville came in, nearly covered the spread in the fourth quarter. So this is a Wake Forest team that really is going to have trouble coming back if they get down by a lot of points, just because their offense isn't very prolific. And I think that's the problem they're going to face in this game. I think Temple comes in obviously red hot, finishing the season with 6 straight wins in a row, obviously beating Navy 34-10 in the finale there, to get themselves into the Military Bowl and really end up in a bowl game that was really above their standard. Nobody was really expecting Temple, coming off of the 3 early season losses, to end up with 10 wins and kind of get an upgrade there into the Military Bowl. But they're nationally ranked at this point, sitting at number 24 entering the matchup. And I think there's just going to be too much offense by the Owls in this game. I think Wake Forest is going to have a hard time keeping up. But if Wake Forest is able to hang in close, I think it'll be because they run the ball, they keep the ball away from Temple, and they're playing solid run defense as well.
Mike McDaniel joining us from inside the ACC. Check us out on YouTube. It's Mark Rogers TV ACC. We will have a ton of college football previews, previewing and predicting the games involving ACC teams in postseason play, including this one, which may be one of the more unique venues for postseason play in college football. And it's really turned out to be a good thing for college football, the Big Ten and the ACC getting together on this one. Because 2 years ago, it was a Penn State-Boston College game that went to overtime. Great game. Last year went into overtime. Duke, Indiana, Blue Devils pulled that one out like 44-41. And we may have more of the same here. We've got 2 teams that off the top of your head you wouldn't think of as being explosive teams, but that's what it turned out for both Northwestern, but especially Pitt this year. And if you don't believe me, check out the box score against Syracuse, 76-61. Pitt threw it well in the second half of the season. They put up 43 in a win against Clemson. And here's a team that's, I believe, the only team in America that defeated Penn State and Clemson, 2 of the top 5 teams in America. So Pitt's 23rd ranked in the country, taking on a Northwestern team that is 6-6.
Yeah, Pitt had a couple of strange losses in there. I mean, the one that sticks out to me, obviously, is the game against Miami, because you do have a couple of big wins on the schedule. The Penn State win obviously looks a lot better than it did early in the season when it happened. But then for Pittsburgh to come back towards the end of the year in early November, find a way to upset Clemson in Death Valley, obviously the biggest win of Pat Narduzzi's tenure there at Pittsburgh. The story in this game is obviously James Conner, the running back for Pittsburgh. Best story in college football, coming back from knee injury and leukemia. The guy's been unbelievable. Comes back, and it's like he never missed a beat. Over 1,000 yards rushing, 16 touchdowns this year. This will be his final collegiate game as he moves on to the NFL. Pittsburgh loves to hang their hat on the run. Nate Peterman's been really good at quarterback, to his credit. 26 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, 2,600 yards passing on the year. But James Conner's the real story here. If Northwestern doesn't find a way to bottle him up, it's going to be a long afternoon for them. Looking at Northwestern, they have Clayton Thorson at quarterback. They're a team that really likes to throw and run the ball. They like to really stay balanced. Thorson, 2,900 yards passing. He had 21 touchdowns to 8 interceptions, so he's been very good in his own right. Justin Jackson, 1,300 yards even on the year, 12 touchdowns. So Northwestern's offense can keep up with Pittsburgh's offense. And it's funny that we can say that now. Pittsburgh's offense in years past has not scored nearly as many points as they have this year. It's been really unbelievable to watch them kind of develop as the season's gone on. Really a team that started as a quietly developing offense is now extremely explosive, especially when you consider Quadri Henderson on the outside and everything that he's been able to do, not only in the jet sweep game, but also in the short passing game, and also on special teams doing punt and kick returns as well. So he's really been the game-breaking player for them that you'll definitely have to watch in this game. Northwestern has one of those in their own right. On the outside, Austin Carr is the guy that Thorson obviously throws to most. Carr's got 1,200 yards receiving and 12 touchdowns on the year. He's been spectacular, one of the better receivers in the Big Ten that nobody really hears about. Northwestern's got a good team. They're 6-6, obviously playing in a very tough conference. But the reason why I'm picking Pittsburgh is because I think their defense is going to find a way in this game. Something that usually you can use to support Pittsburgh. Not really in this case, considering what you brought up, that 76-61 victory over Syracuse to close the year. You would have thought that game was a basketball score now as we get close to ACC basketball play. But when looking at Pittsburgh, I think their defense is actually going to make enough plays here, force Thorson into a couple of turnovers. I think that's going to be the difference in the game. And if you've never watched the Pinstripe Bowl there at Yankee Stadium, one of the cooler venues in all of sports to host a football game, definitely recommend it, even if you're not a fan of these two teams. If you have a little bit of time to even catch part of this game, definitely do it. It's a really, really cool venue there, having the football game at Yankee Stadium, like you mentioned, Mark.
Cool venue, maybe a cold venue. It might be a little bit frigid, of course, and not your typical bowl setting when it comes to weather, but yes, very cool. And what is delivered, as I mentioned off the top, in recent years, 2 overtime games against the Big Ten and the ACC. While you were breaking things down, Mike, we were looking at highlights from the North Carolina Pitt game, and that was pretty much a microcosm of Pitt's season right there. We saw the good and we saw the bad. We saw the explosive offense and a 17-point lead in the fourth quarter, and then we saw the defense give it away and the secondary not be able to handle one of the better wide receiver cores in the country. Northwestern, not the caliber of North Carolina, but you mentioned Austin Carr, and he's prolific. And so it'll be interesting to see those two teams get it on. One other matchup that is underway, Mike, before we get to next Thursday. So we wanted to cover everything through next Wednesday's show. And this is, when we talk bowl contracts between conferences, I think this is another good one that makes sense. It pits one of the better teams in the Big 12 every year against one of the better teams in the ACC. So this year, it's a West Virginia team that vied for the Big 12 title, finished 10-2, 16th in the country right now, taking on Miami. Mark Richt, much to do about him taking over the program, and they pretty much delivered what we expected. They didn't have that marquee win to break them through. They took Florida State to the wire. That could have been the game. But then they lost to the likes of North Carolina. They lost to the likes of some teams that you would expect them to. And it's another non-division championship year for Miami, but they get to a bowl game at 8-4, where they haven't won one for 10 years.
Yeah, who would have thought the worst loss on Miami's schedule this year arguably was Notre Dame at 4-8. If you looked at that game in the preseason, you would have said, wow, that game could really be a spectacle there out in South Bend, but ends up being a matchup between a Miami team at that point that was meddling with mediocrity and Notre Dame, which has just been downright bad all season long. You look at Miami, though, they finished out the season strong, obviously 4 straight wins, one of those over Pitt, which was the biggest win out of the 4. It was 51-28, a game that really wasn't close when you consider where Pitt ended up, like we just mentioned there a moment ago. The way the Panthers were able to close the year, when you consider that Miami was able to beat them and beat them rather handily, it really springboarded the Hurricanes here through the final 3 or 4 games of their schedule into, of course, now the Russell Athletic Bowl against West Virginia. And I hope you like points in this game, Mark, because there are going to be a lot of them. The defenses are fine. Let's just put it that way. West Virginia's defense, I mean, they play okay by Big 10 or Big 12 standards, but they're not a great defense by any stretch of the imagination. The same can be said for Miami, even though both defenses have improved relatively well compared to where they were at the beginning of the year. Skyler Howard for West Virginia, he's a big-time quarterback. 3,100 yards passing, 26 touchdowns on the year. The guy's been spectacular. I mean, look at the receivers they have on the outside, namely Shelton Gibson, who's really been the playmaker for him. 40 catches on the year, 927 yards, 8 touchdowns. They look for him in the middle of the field. They look for him in the red zone. He's been a guy that's been spectacular for them all year long, and really they put up a ton of points there, not only in the passing game, but in the rushing game as well. Obviously, when you look at their leading rusher in Justin Crawford, 1,100 yards rushing on the year, only had 4 touchdowns. They do a lot of their scoring through the air. Skylar Howard also likes to run the ball a little bit as well. So West Virginia is a dynamic offense. They like to spread you out and throw the ball a ton. That's something that Miami has struggled with defensively for most of the year. When you consider some of the losses that they've had, North Carolina, Notre Dame, teams that have a lot of receivers on the outside and a lot of guys who can make plays in space. That's where Miami's defense has struggled. So it'll be interesting here in this game to see how they adapt in the Russell Athletic Bowl. Can Miami score enough points? Definitely can. Brad Kaya, say what you want about him. He struggled with accuracy issues early in the year. He entered his senior season here at Miami as one of the top-rated quarterbacks on a lot of NFL boards. Finished the year not so, just because of the accuracy issues like I referred to, but the way that he closed the season out, he really started to step into his own there and become the quarterback that Mark Richt was looking for there in the last month of the year. Finishes with 3,200 yards passing, 23 touchdowns to 7 interceptions. He's been really good coming in on a hot streak. It'll just be interesting to see how he reacts with a little more than a month off to prepare for his West Virginia game. The big story here for Miami as the season's kind of progressed is the offensive line has really improved. And a lot of that can be said with Mark Walton in the running game. He cracked 1,000 yards rushing, 14 touchdowns. He's their lead back. They like to run Joe Yearby as well, kind of thunder and lightning type combo they have going there at Miami. So they like to run the ball a ton to open up the pass and throw to guys like freshman receiver Amon Richards, who's been spectacular, 866 yards receiving, only 2 touchdowns on the year, but he's been primarily a possession receiver. But he's really developed as the year's gone on. He's been more of a downfield passing threat for Miami, which they really want to see him develop into as he progresses in his collegiate career. So Amon Richards has really come on strong here for Miami this year. But they have a lot of playmakers. I mean, they've obviously recruited well, even when they were struggling under Al Golden. Miami's always a school that can recruit the athletes. They got plenty of offense to keep up with West Virginia. It'll come down to which team makes enough stops in this game. I think it's going to be Miami, just because, once again, West Virginia, outside of a couple games in their conference schedule, they really haven't played a ton of tough opponents this year. I think Miami has kind of run the gamut here in the ACC. They finished with 8-4. I know that they play in a weaker ACC Coastal Division, but they saw teams like Virginia Tech. They played against a Notre Dame team that, despite being down, does have a ton of athletes on both sides of the ball, offensively and defensively. And then you look at a team like Pittsburgh that Miami was able to handle. They're a team that had a lot of offense and struggled on defense, just like West Virginia. I think the teams are very similar in that regard. And because we kind of have that there on the slate, where Miami has performed relatively well there, against a team like Pittsburgh that's similar in style offensively to West Virginia, I think Miami's going to find a way to make enough stops to win this football game. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, it'll be first team to 50 wins, and I think Miami will be that team.
Mike, I've made a lot of friends with Big 12 observers this year because I've repeatedly said it's the worst conference in college football, in the Power 5, of course, and it's not even close. So I think the ACC is decidedly, even in that division, decidedly better than the Big 12. Forget the records, forget the rankings. I know West Virginia had a fine season, but when they matched up against the better teams in the Big 12, even in their own building, in a snowstorm that should have been to their advantage against Oklahoma, they were blown out of the building. The best team that they played out of conference was BYU. They struggled to get a win there. For Miami, top to bottom on that roster, I don't think there's any question that they have more talent and more speed on the roster than West Virginia does. What it comes down to me with Miami is the same thing that we've talked about now for 2 or 3 years, and hopefully Mark Richt, for Miami fans' sake, is going to correct it, and that's the offensive line. They need to protect Brad Kaya. And I don't know that West Virginia's got the type of talent as edge rushers to take advantage of the issues that Miami has along the offensive line, but it's also running the ball. So Miami comes out of the gate this year, Mike, as you well know, and they run it down the throats of 3 inferior foes. And we thought, okay, Mark Richt, he's fixed the running game. They got 2 quality backs. This is going to be a Miami ground game that's going to really set up play action, and Kaya is going to be in great shape. But once they started to face decent defenses in the ACC, not even great defenses like Georgia Tech, couldn't run the ball. So I put it on the offensive line for Miami. If the offensive line just plays, if they just work out some issues in that 4-week gap between the last game and the West Virginia game in the Russell Athletic, I think Miami's going to be in good shape in this one.
Yeah, and Miami's offensive line, to what you just said, I mean, the offensive line played a lot better towards the end of the year, and I think that's one encouraging thing if you're a Hurricanes fan. A, they protected Brad Kaya. B, maybe more importantly, they ran the ball a lot better than they had in the weeks prior. You saw it at the beginning of the year. They had the really solid running attack, but there were 3 inferior opponents, like you mentioned. And then once conference play started, the offensive line play just got worse. They had some injuries that kind of decimated both sides of the lines on offensive and the defensive lines that, really held them back throughout the early part of conference play. But they got healthier as the season went along. The offensive line started to be a little bit more cohesive as a unit. And what we saw is a stronger Miami rushing attack. And if that's the case in this bowl game against West Virginia, I think they'll be in good shape.
If you love ACC sports, check out Mike McDaniel inside the ACC. His Twitter handle is Mike McDaniel ACC. If you love the conference across the board, if you love football, you can check me out there as well, because even when the season's over, Mike and I will mix it up when it comes to recruiting, getting you set for National Signing Day. And we've also have launched, as we mentioned, a YouTube channel, Mark Rogers TV ACC, plenty of videos there. So, Mike, we appreciate the time, man.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it.
All right. Again, this is College Football Coast to Coast. We come your way every week with some of the best bloggers, broadcasters, and contributors across the country on college football. Catch me at Mark Rogers TV on Twitter, on Facebook, and, of course, on YouTube as well. For Marty McPadden, my director and mentor of sorts, I'm Mark Rogers, and we will see you next week. Merry Christmas. If you don't celebrate Christmas, of course, happy holidays, and we will see you again for more college football talk next Wednesday night.